You perceive that there's a lack of awareness in the West when it comes to the struggle Ukrainians are facing daily. As you say, they are holding the fort not just for us, but also for civilization as we know it.
Yeah, I don't think that's really an overstatement. I am really struck by this. I was just in Paris, and it was lovely to give lectures at ENELCO and the Sorbonne, and lovely to talk to the French press, and lovely to be in Paris in general, where I was educated. But I can't escape the feeling, such a strong feeling that I have there as in other Western capitals, that we are living this life on borrowed time and that we've borrowed it from the Ukrainians, that the Ukrainians are paying for this in the way that they have to live. They're paying for this in their lives. They're paying for this in blood, quite literally, that we can go on and have our Paris and have our London and have our Barcelona. And I feel like we don't respect enough all of the courage that's involved. And I think in a way we're a little intimidated by the courage and so have trouble recognizing it. And I think we also just have a failure of imagination of how quickly things could get for us if the dam were to break, if they were to be defeated, if it became normal that an attack like Russia's could succeed.
Given the situation now in the discourse in the West, we talk about ceasefire, we talk about negotiations. How do you feel about it, especially when you talk to Ukrainians?
Well, first of all, it won't work not only morally, but just simply politically if the Ukrainians aren't involved, because this is their war more than anybody else's. And so any kind of ceasefire agreement will have to involve them, because if it doesn't involve them, they'll just be forced to react to the real world as it is. The second thing, which is really important, is that any kind of agreement has to respect Ukrainian sovereignty. And this is something that Putin will not want, and that the Americans may not necessarily understand. So by sovereignty, I mean basic things like Ukrainians decide what their armed forces are like. Ukrainians decide who their allies can be. No one tells the Ukrainians which allied troops can be on their territory. No one tells the Ukrainians they have to give up territory legally. So the basic attributes of sovereignty are the crucial part for if this is going to work in the long run. And then a little tactical thing for the French and the Europeans is this. I have trouble imagining that Putin and Trump could come up with something like a peace treaty, because I don't think Putin wants one, and I don't think Trump is necessarily equipped for that kind of comprehensive thinking. I think what they could get is a ceasefire. And if there is a ceasefire, that is the moment of truth for Europe. Because if there's a ceasefire, Europe will be permitted to go in, admit Ukraine to be a member of the European Union, encourage private investment, have state investment, do all the things that could make Ukraine safe. The ceasefire would be an opportunity for Europe. My concern is that for Putin, the ceasefire is just a way to divert your attention. And Europe has the habit, when Americans do something, to then wait and see what the Americans do next. So if Trump gets to a ceasefire, you can't think, oh, a peace treaty is coming next, let's wait. It probably won't. If the ceasefire comes, Europeans have to act in their own name, at their own initiative, and in their own interests right away to try to make Ukraine secure and prosperous. Thinking of the examples of places like South Korea or West Germany, where there wasn't a formal peace settlement, but there was a ceasefire, and the investment and the support came, and then you eventually have, or actually quite quickly have, flourishing countries.
But also, we're speaking about the possibility of a ceasefire, but that can also only work if the two parties are playing by the same rules, are following the same rules. And we've seen time and again that Russia doesn't respect any other rules than its own. So how do we get around this?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the very specific contingency where there is a declared ceasefire. And if we want to have a chance that Russia won't start the war again, then Europe has to help, because the Americans, as we were already talking about, won't. At the moment, we don't have the capacity. It's unclear that we have the will. So if there is a ceasefire, the only way to deter Russia is to make Ukraine as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. Because I agree, if there is a ceasefire, it's simply, for Putin, it's an alarm clock. 9 months later, he will start the war again, or 12 months later, or 15 months later. The crucial thing is to get into Ukraine, help Ukraine, support Ukraine, also militarily, so that when he turns his gaze back to Ukraine, he won't do it a second time. That's the thing that has to be done. Because of course, Russia will not observe ceasefires with Ukraine on its own. They never have. They violated Minsk from the very beginning, and there's no reason to trust them. But because you can't trust them, that's why Europe has to act. Like, it's not enough to say, oh, the Americans are unreliable and so are the Russians. Of course, that's true. So then the question is, as Europeans, what do you do to form the situation yourselves the way that you would like it to be formed?
A while ago, you were saying that all empires are bound to overreach and eventually collapse. Is that something that you also think is true for Russia, which acts like an empire?
Of course. All empires do eventually collapse. They all talk about how they're going to last forever, and they all eventually collapse, and that's a tension within all empires. But it's also the case, more to the point, that empires tend to lose wars. When wars start, if we don't think of history, we say, oh, the big country must always win, or the empire must always win. But since 1945, that simply hasn't been true. The colonial power usually loses and then forgets about losing, which is the French case or the American case. We lose lots of wars. So it would be normal for Ukraine to win. It would be normal for Russia to lose. And so it's very important for us to think historically and realize, actually, not only do empires often lose, but the only way to become a normal country is to lose those imperial wars. It was very important for Germany, France, Belgium, all the other European countries to lose their imperial wars. That's what allowed them to become the essentially very attractive places that they are now. Even if you only care about Russia, you should wish defeat on Russia. As, by the way, many people who care about Russia, including Russians, do, because defeat is the one chance for them to move on to something besides the kind of system that they have now.
Timothy Snyder, thank you very much.
Thank you.